Welcome to the Dirt Road Tourist, a podcast about overlanding where we focus on the places you find on the way to camp. I'm Ken, and we aren't overlanding to find the most difficult off-road trails. We're seeking out the delicious food, the people, the culture, and sometimes the oddities, the America that you can only find when you leave the interstates behind and get out into the country. We'll talk about gear, camping tips to make your life out here more comfortable, interesting places to see, and vehicles that get you out to the good stuff. Join Susan and I to hear what we discover next on this episode of the Dirt Road Tourist. Bienvenue, mes amis. Today we shall be exploring the fine art of culinary creation in camping. Okay, maybe not. We're actually going to be talking about camp cooking. So, food is one of the most important parts, at least it is for me, of making a good overlanding trip. When I think back to camping when I was a kid and with the scouts and with family, it's the memories of s'mores and how great food always seems to taste in camp. Those are just as vivid for me as the outdoor activities that we used to do. So, you may be a beginner who has gone through overlanding videos and you're confused by the endless array of camp and cooking gear and gadgets that are out there. Or you may be a seasoned veteran. You see what I did there? And you've gotten into a rut and you're looking for some inspiration. Well, there are a ton of different ways to cook in camp and to have food on your journeys, and they range from as basic to as complex as you really want to get. This isn't going to be a comprehensive list because nobody's got time for that, and certainly not in a 30-minute podcast, but we'll go over some of the bigger ones. Well, on the simplest end, you let someone else do the cooking. If you're camping not too far off the beaten track or you're in a campground that's right outside of town, you may be able to stop for meals when you're on your way to camp. And this works better in the summer months when it's still light out at the hour when you'd really want to eat your evening meal, because let's face it, you don't want to be setting up camp in the dark. There was a trip that we took to an Overland South event this past year, and that was down around Charleston. And one of the things that we wanted to do was hit up Rodney Scott's barbecue. And we went there and had just a huge barbecue feast, rolled out of there just completely stuffed. And we went on to the camping event and set up. Well, come evening, we had food planned. Yes, we had something to cook, but we looked at each other and we were like, "Man, I'm too full. I don't want to. I don't want to cook dinner tonight." So we ended up just basically snacking through the evening. So it's definitely possible to actually get your meal and handled before you even get into camp. The advantage of doing it this way, obviously, is there's nothing to pack and there's nothing to forget. And you may not even need to take cold food storage with you. The disadvantage is that you have to plan your daily route around having places you want to stop at the times when you want to eat. So, moving up from there, we have doing cold meals. And this doesn't require anything but a cooler and maybe some paper plates and utensils. So, the things that you would take here are lunch meats and bread for sandwiches. Lunchables are always a good choice for coolers because the packing is waterproof and you don't have to worry about them getting damp in the ice chest. You can pick up things like chicken salad, pasta salad, cheeses, crackers, and fruit and make a charcuterie board in camp. And I know a lot of people who actually, this is their standard camp meal, is that they like to make a charcuterie board in camp. You can pick these up at any grocery store along your route, so they're easy to find. And the advantage is that there's very little prep. The cleanup is a breeze, and with a little creativity, you can produce some delicious meals out in camp. If you are the kind who has to have a hot meal in camp, well, there's a ton of options for cooking your feasts. And let's talk about some of the methods you have for cooking up a hot meal out there. The simplest method will be your campfire. You're going to have a campfire, right? Yeah, well, don't worry, I'm going to be covering that subject too. I've got an episode in the works on that. The advantage of a campfire is that they're extremely versatile. You can cook a lot of different things on there. You can do things like hot dogs. You can wrap bread or croissant dough around a stick and cook that over the fire. You can do shish kebabs, silver turtles. If you don't know what silver turtles are, I'll be talking about that a little bit later here. If you're cooking with a campfire, though, a smart hack is to bring a bag of lump charcoal with you so that you don't have to wait for a bed of wood coals to form. Most of the stuff you're going to be cooking on the campfire, you need a bed of coals, and you either have to wait for the fire to burn for a couple of hours to have enough wood coals, or you can just put a small pile of the lump charcoal next to it when you're starting your fire, and in about 30 minutes, you have the bed of coals that you need. Now, if you add to that a grilling grate, and they make these things with folding legs, you can do steaks, fish, burgers, chops, all kinds of stuff. Now, if you're planning on cooking with a campfire, keep in mind that depending on the location you plan to travel in and the current conditions, campfires may not be allowed. So it's important to check ahead on this if you plan to rely on your campfire. So, adding a camping stove, it brings even more options onto your plate. And you really kind of need the camp stove in order to make coffee in the morning. But the camp stove also allows you to make breakfast when you might not want to have to revive and put back out a campfire before getting back out on the trail. And camp stoves come in three main types: there's propane, butane, and white gas. The white gas stoves are the oldest type. They're the kind that you pour the liquid gas into and have to pump up the tank in order to pressurize it. But they perform better than the other two types at high altitudes and particularly in extreme cold. So you see a lot of the white gas ones are expedition type stoves, and they can get to be really expensive, but they perform really well. Moving on, you have butane stoves, and butane burns hotter than propane. The canisters are readily available and cheap. Butane is typically used for smaller backpacker style stoves. Propane is typically your fuel of choice for the larger two burner or more base camp style stoves. And most of these stoves ship with the hookups to use with 1 pound propane canisters. However, with a simple adapter hose, they can be used with 5 pound, 10 pound, or even 20 pound tanks. And I definitely suggest using it with the refillable tanks because they vastly reduce the cost of fuel for these stoves. The last time I looked, a 2 pack of 1 pound canisters was running about $12.99, or just say $13 at Tractor Supply. My 5 pound tank, on the other hand, costs $3 to refill. So a 5 pound tank that I carry is more than sufficient for a week long trip, and it takes up very little space in the rig. So those are handy to have. Also, refillable tanks, you can refill them at most U-Haul locations and at Tractor Supply. So even if you run out while you're on a trip, the refills are usually pretty easy to find. Stoves, the propane stoves come in a wide range of price points. On the upper end, you have ones like the Camp Chef Mountaineer or the Jetboil Genesis, and these will set you back $300 plus. On the lower end, you have the good old Coleman two burner, which starts at around $50. The more expensive stoves will get you a little more adjustability and they'll give you hotter burners, but the Coleman, quite frankly, gets the job done, and it's what we actually carry on our rig. So, other cooking options, you have things like griddles, like the Blackstone. And the advantage of a Blackstone is that you got a lot of cooking space. It's great for cooking food for a group, and it's a breakfast cooking champ. But in my book, it's less versatile than a two burner stove. And it also, one of the cons is that it's bulkier than two burner stove options. It won't fit into most drawer systems. You also have scottles. And full disclosure, I've never actually owned a scottle, but it's basically a wok mounted on a burner on folding legs. And again, it has plenty of room to cook for a crowd. And I guess it's great if you like fajitas and fried rice a lot. But there's YouTube videos and entire groups on cooking with a scuttle, and the things have a rabidly devoted fan base. But like the Blackstone, at least in my book, the juice isn't worth the squeeze when it comes to storing a scuttle because they're still kind of bulky. Another option you have for cooking in camp is hibachis and portable grills like the Weber Smoky Joe. One advantage of these is that you probably already use a grill at home and you can cook the dishes that you're already used to cooking. So you'll most likely get great results right out of the gate. And whether it's a charcoal grill or a propane grill, you can buy fuel pretty much anywhere. If you're just getting started, you may have one already of these around the house, so it's one less thing to buy as well. Same as the above two, though, it will take a fair amount of space in the rig. The grills and the hibachis can get kind of bulky, so that's one of the drawbacks of those. If you're planning on taking a charcoal grill, and this is also one, And traveling somewhere with a burn ban in place, just be aware that they're talking about these too. So don't burn down half of Oregon to the ground in the pursuit of a cheeseburger, all right? Now, there's other things like camping ovens. Yeah, I said what I said. There are camping ovens out there. Coleman makes one that folds flat, and then you fold it out into a little box with a door on the front, and you set it on top of one of the burners in your camping stove. And a lot of people will say that the classic Coleman folding oven, it doesn't work, or that they burn everything on the bottoms. And if you try to use it right out of the box, it does. However, there's a trick for making these things work, and it's a pizza stone trick. People will take a pizza stone that they can cut down to the size of the oven and make sure that pizza stone lays down flat in the very bottom of the Coleman oven. What it does is it moderates the heat going up into the oven and disperses it and works like a charm. Makes it basically so that you can have cinnamon rolls for breakfast, biscuits, you can make roasted potatoes, all kinds of things with these. And if you really want to impress a group of veteran overlanders, take a bag of Totino's pizza rolls with you and pass those around the campfire. That's some serious camp cred there. So, with all of these out of the way, what does Susan and I keep in our kitchen kit? Well, I've already mentioned the Coleman two burner stove. We also have a Coleman skillet. I won this on one of the overlanding events that we went to, and it has a really nice heavy bottom, so I like the skillet. It's great for searing stuff off. We have a fire maple camping pot, and that's kind of a general purpose. I do all kinds of stuff in that pot, and it's what I use for making coffee as well. We have a Skriddle, and it says here in my notes that I'll struggle to explain what a Skriddle even is. I'm going to try to put a link to it in the show notes, but basically it is a long rectangular griddle that fits over both burners on our two burner stove, and it has sloped sides on the edges there, so it works kind of like as a skillet, but it also has the cooking space of a griddle that you can fit an entire pound of bacon and cook it at one time on there. You can do pancakes. It basically does everything that our Blackstone does. So that's the reason why we no longer carry the Blackstone with us. But absolutely love the Skriddle. It's a very thick carbon steel made out of, and it holds heat really well, and it's very nonstick once it's been seasoned. So we also have, moving on from there, we have a grill grate with folding legs. I don't pack that every trip, but if I'm planning on doing something like grilling a steak or something as one of the planned meals, I'll take that along too. We have a StanSport 9-cup percolator, and I have an AeroPress for backup. And now this gets into a coffee discussion, and that gets into pour over versus French press versus cowboy coffee versus mocha pot versus percolators. It's very much a personal taste thing. And number two, that's an episode all of its own. I settle on a percolator because I don't like to deal with a fussy method of making coffee unless I've already had a cup of coffee. So I also have an MSI nesting pot kit, camping pot kit for backups, just in case I lose or damage some of my other kit. I've got a spice container set inside of a canvas wrap cover that Susan got me for Valentine's Day, and thank you, Susan. And I keep all of my spices, salt, pepper, things like that in this little spice container set. Then we have our assorted utensils, things like your spatulas, knives, a cutting board, tongs. And here's a pro tip, and definitely listen up to this one, folks. Make sure you buy a separate can opener for camping and make sure you keep it with your camping gear always. The can opener is one of those things that you are almost guaranteed to forget to pack, and it will lead to extreme regret when you're 25 miles past nowhere and trying to open a can of pork and beans by beating it with a rock. You should also get one of the P38 GI style can openers. They're sold on Amazon and they're dirt cheap. The things are tiny, so just toss it into your console, your glove box, and forget about it until you need it, either because you didn't take my advice and you forgot to pack your can opener, or your twist can opener decided to fall apart. Thank me later. We have our 12-volt refrigerator. We used to carry a rotomolded cooler, but we didn't like the fact that the ice melt. It got messy. It was hard to clean out after you got back from trips. It would only last for so long before you had to drain it and put more ice in. We had the ice melt got into a whole bunch of food at one of the overland events that we went to and ruined everything in the cooler. So we decided to go ahead and pull the trigger on a 12-volt refrigerator. The cons of a refrigerator is that once you get one, you need a way to power the refrigerator. And, well, welcome to that rabbit hole. I'm going to have a whole episode where I talk about power systems on your rig, but that can be anything from as simple to carrying a portable battery system like a Jackery to adventures in electrical engineering on your vehicles. So I'll talk about that at a later time. Another pro tip here is when you're packing your food, don't forget the condiments because you always forget the condiments, or at least I do. Nobody wants a sadness burger in camp. Now, you can either order these great big old grab bags of ketchup, mayonnaise, and mustard from Amazon. They're fairly inexpensive and you get hundreds of packets on these things. Or you can just go commit a larceny at your local fast food joints and build your stash the old fashioned way. But the packets are convenient because they don't require any refrigeration, they're small, and they're easy to stash in little corners of your storage. So definitely build up a stash of those or buy a stash of them and keep those with your camp gear too. So now that we've talked about how to cook in camp, what are some of our favorite things to cook in camp? Well, I told you I was going to be talking about the silver turtles, and this is something that goes all the way back to if you've ever been in Cub Scouts or had a kid in Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, you've probably made these things and you've probably eaten them before. And it's one of the simplest ways to actually get a meal in camp. What they basically are is some heavy duty aluminum foil. You're going to drag out about a good 3 to 4 foot piece of aluminum foil, heavy duty, and you're going to take your protein, cut up into small pieces and some veggies and some seasonings and a couple of pats of butter. And you're going to pile this into the middle of the foil, fold it over the top of the food there, and you're going to roll the ends of the foil where they meet together to seal this into a perfectly sealed packet. And then once you got the food in there, you basically take this packet of this foil wrap packet and you drop it onto coals in your campfire. And this is where I take the charcoal with me. So one of our favorite ones to do with this is it's a Cajun andouille recipe. We get some andouille sausage, cut it into little rounds, some potatoes, some carrots, some onions, and we chop those up into little pieces there, cube it, and we put that together with the andouille on the foil. Throw some Cajun seasoning on there, a little bit of oil, and a couple of pats of butter. Seal it up. You throw it on the coals for about 10 minutes, flip it, cook it for another 10 minutes, pull it out, break it open, and eat, and they're delicious. The advantage of the silver turtles is that there's very little cleanup after dinner. All you got to do is really wad up the foil, throw it away, clean off your fork, and you're good to go. Fajitas are another good one, another one of our favorites because they're easy to pre prep at home. You chop up your onions and green pepper, you chop up your protein, and you toss everything into containers and put it in your fridge. So in camp, all I have to do is just toss the veggies on a Skriddle with one burner at full and the other one turned down. So I have a cook zone and a keep warm zone on the other side. So after the veggies are tender, I basically slide those over to the warm zone and then bring on the proteins. Cook those, and you've basically got dinner. The advantage of the fajitas is time. If you've prepped your ingredients at home, I can get a meal on the table within about a few minutes of breaking out my stove. So it's fast, not a lot of cleanup, and it's really convenient and it's delicious. One of the other things that we cook that not really cooking, but things that we make all the time are wraps. And we'll get some flour tortillas and take various cold cuts, veggies, cheese, condiment spread on there, and we make wraps to throw in the fridge. And we use these a lot on our travel days. because along with some personal size bags of chips, you can at a get whenever we stop for gas, you can go back, grab one of these wraps, bag of chips, and you're back on the road. So they're really convenient for travel days, just because it's a grab and go lunch. I like to do smash burgers on the Skriddle. If you're going to do something like a burger, hash browns actually make a really good stand in for fries, and you don't need to have a pot full of oil out in camp. If you really feel like getting fancy, you can do something like a tuna tataki. And this requires a little pre prep at home. You'll have to make the sauce at home and keep it in a little bottle. It's basically ginger, ponzu, soy sauce, and a little bit of shallot. And you can whip up the sauce. You want to take ginger paste and sesame seeds with you to camp. You throw those into a Ziploc bag, a little bit of salt and pepper on the tuna, throw it into the bag and get it nice and coated with the sesame seeds and the ginger, and then drop that onto as screaming hot as you can get on a camp stove skillet, and then sear it for about 30 seconds on either side. Pull that out, slice it into thin slices, and fan it out for presentation. And let me tell you what, having something like tuna tataki in a campground area, it's just fancy. Another thing that we like to do is what I call the vacuum sealer trick. If you have one of the Food Saver vacuum sealers, and you should because they save you a ton of money, but you can whip up a big batch of chili or beef stew. And here's where you could even make that dish of coq au vin or beef bourguignon if you want to get really fancy. And take your leftovers and put them into a vacuum seal bag and vacuum seal them and then freeze them so that when you're ready to head out to camp, you just grab this vacuum seal bag and throw it in your fridge or your cooler. In camp, all you got to do is just boil a pot of water. Once the water's boiling, you take out your bag, drop it into the boiling water, heat through, pull it out, open up the bag, and serve. And it's a absolutely painless way to get a really nice dinner. I mean, a batch of chili on a cold night tastes amazing, and the best part about it is that the bag you're going to throw into your trash to pack out, and there's nothing to clean up. You have whatever utensils and whatever bowls you have to wash those, but you even have a pot of hot water sitting there on the stove to use for cleanup. So it's super simple, and the world is kind of your oyster as far as what you want to take vacuum seal for reheating. You can do all kinds of stuff. The vacuum sealer also comes in handy with your coffee. So if you're the kind that wants to have pre-ground coffee or wants to grind your own coffee every morning, you can actually grind coffee for the days that you're going to be in camp, portion it out, and put it into a vacuum sealed bag. Coffee does not like air and it doesn't like sunlight. So you take these little pre portioned things of coffee that's vacuum sealed and keep them in a little sealable box, or you can throw it into a light proof bag. And that'll keep your coffee fresh. Every day, you just zip open one of these vacuum seal bags and you have fresh coffee to make. So that's a trick that I like to do for that. So, food is an important part of any trip because with all of the extra activities there are to do out there, you really need the calories. So, when you're putting together your kitchen equipment, don't get swept up in the marketing. It's really easy to do, and there's just an incredible amount of stuff out there that they're trying to sell you. And a lot of this stuff looks cool, but always keep your rig in mind and know what storage you have, and make sure that everything that you buy for your kit has a home on your rig and that it's easy to get to, it's easy to use, and it's easy to put away. The easier this stuff is to use, the more likely you are to actually use it and not go, yeah, I don't feel like getting all that out. Let's just eat chips or make a sandwich. And if you are a foodie, you do want to explore the dishes that you can make in camp, but even with the fancy stuff, you want to try to keep it convenient because you're more likely to actually get around to doing it when you get out there. You also want to have a secure, airtight way to store your foods. And in some cases, it's probably a good idea to wash your dishes pretty well away from where you're camping. And this avoids sending invites out to 4-footed or 6-legged dinner guests or You don't wind up, with a raccoon eating your morning cereal in the middle of the night. You also want to be bear aware, especially when you're camping, primitive camping in bear habitat. There are things like bear canisters, and you can also use a dry sack and put your food in there, attach a rope to it, and throw that over a tree branch and hoist it. It's called a food hang or a bear hang. And depending on how prevalent the bears are in the area that you might be camping, you might even consider cooking and consuming your foods away from where your campsite is. And the reason for this is because bears have extremely acute sense of smell. It's 7 times greater than bloodhounds. They can smell food from over 2 miles away. The other thing to keep in mind, whether you're cooking over your campfire or over your stove, is you want to always be sure to practice fire safety and leave no trace principles. And I'm going to talk a lot more about leave no trace principles, as I go forward with the podcasts. You want to pack out all your waste, including your food waste. Just because you think that food scrap is biodegradable, it doesn't belong on the ground. And the reason for this is because you can habituate wildlife to hanging out at your campsite because they start to associate it with food. And this leads to wildlife and human encounters, which can lead to aggression. Well, that's no fun for the next people who have to use the campsite that you left, and it's something which usually ends very badly for the wildlife. So just don't do it. Take your food trash out with you and leave your campsites better than you found them. That wraps up my discussion of all things cooking in the great outdoors. Let's see what else we have here for this week. Oh, look, the mail's here. It's time for the mailbag segment, but there's no mail in the bag for this week. If you have a comment, question, or suggestion for the show, you can send an email to me at ken@dirtroadtourist.com. That's ken@dirtroadtourist.com. The Dirt Road Tourist can also be found on Facebook and Instagram, so look me up. I love to hear from listeners, so send me your thoughts. That's the show for this week. Thank you for listening, and I hope this episode inspires you to hone your inner chef on your next camping trip. Until next week, bon appetit. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and join me on the journey to explore this incredible world of ours. I'll see you here next Monday with more on finding your journey right here on the Dirt Road Tourist. Have a great week and go see something amazing.